The night was draped in a heavy cloak of darkness as Darwin cruised down the lonely stretch of highway. The only companion to his solitude was the rhythmic hum of his car engine and the occasional flicker of his headlights illuminating the desolate road ahead. Darwin had always been drawn to the mystery of the night, finding solace in its quietude. But tonight, as he navigated through the winding roads, a sense of unease gnawed at him, like an ominous shadow lurking just beyond the reach of his headlights. As he rounded a bend, Darwin caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. A figure standing by the roadside, its form barely discernible in the dim light. He slammed on the brakes, heart pounding in his chest, but when he looked again, the figure had vanished into the darkness. Shaken but determined to press on, Darwin continued his journey, the encounter lingering in his mind like a haunting refrain. But as the miles stretched on, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes followed his every move from the shadows. Just when Darwin thought he couldn't bear the tension any longer, he spotted a sign for a rest stop up ahead. Grateful for the chance to break the monotony of the drive, he pulled into the deserted parking lot and switched off the engine. As he stepped out of the car, the night air enveloped him like a suffocating embrace. There was a palpable sense of dread hanging in the air, sending shivers down Darwin's spine. But he pushed aside his fear and headed towards the dimly lit building, desperate for some semblance of normalcy in the eerie silence of the night. Darwin entered the rest stop, the soft glow of fluorescent lights casting long, eerie shadows across the empty room. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old coffee and disinfectant. He approached the counter, half expecting to find it abandoned, but to his relief, a weary-looking attendant emerged from the shadows. "Can I help you?" the attendant asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Darwin nodded, trying to mask the unease that still clung to him like a second skin. "Just a coffee, please," he replied, forcing a smile. As the attendant prepared his drink, Darwin glanced around the room, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silence pressed in on him, suffocating and heavy, as if the very walls held secrets too dark to be spoken aloud. Just as he was about to retreat to the safety of his car, Darwin's gaze fell upon a faded poster pinned to the notice board. A missing persons report, its edges curling with age. The face staring back at him sent a chill down his spine. It was the same figure he had seen by the roadside, the one that had vanished into thin air. Before he could process the implications of his discovery, a sudden movement caught his eye. A shadow shifting in the corner of the room, too swift to be human. Panic surged through Darwin's veins as he realized he was not alone. With a trembling hand, he reached for his phone, fingers fumbling for the emergency dial. But before he could make the call, a voice spoke from the darkness, cold and mocking. "Leaving so soon, Darwin?" it whispered, sending a wave of terror crashing over him. Heart pounding, Darwin turned to flee, but the door was blocked by a looming figure, its features obscured by the darkness. Trapped and cornered, he had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the nightmare closing in around him. Darwin's mind raced with fear as he searched desperately for an escape route. He darted towards the back of the room, hoping to find another exit, but every door seemed to lead to a dead end. The shadows seemed to coil around him, suffocating and relentless. Just when he thought all hope was lost, Darwin's hand brushed against something cold and metallic, a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. With a surge of adrenaline, he tore it from its mount and swung it wildly at the figure blocking the door, shattering the silence with a deafening clang. The figure stumbled back, caught off guard by Darwin's sudden burst of defiance. Seizing the opportunity, Darwin dashed towards the door, ignoring the pounding in his chest as he pushed through the darkness. Outside, the night air was a welcome relief, cool and crisp against his skin. But there was no time to savor his freedom, not when danger lurked just beyond the reach of his headlights. Heart racing, Darwin sprinted towards his car, every instinct screaming at him to flee. But as he reached for the door handle, a sudden chill ran down his spine. The figure from the roadside was standing just a few feet away, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. With a guttural scream, Darwin flung himself into the car, slamming the door shut behind him. He fumbled for the keys, hands shaking with terror. As the figure drew closer, its presence a suffocating weight in the night. Finally, the engine roared to life, and Darwin slammed his foot on the gas pedal, tearing away from the rest stop with a screech of tires. The figure disappeared into the darkness, but Darwin knew it would only be a matter of time before it returned, its silent vigil haunting him forevermore. As he drove into the night, Darwin couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. A darkness that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting to claim its next victim in the dead of night. And as the miles stretched on, swallowed by the yawning expanse of the highway, Darwin knew that he would never be able to escape the horrors that awaited him in the darkness. Michelle had always been curious about the basement of her old Victorian house. Ever since she and her family moved in, there was an unspoken rule about not going down there. It wasn't just the dim lighting or the creaky stairs that deterred her. It was the sense of foreboding that hung heavy in the air whenever she ventured near the basement door. One rainy evening, when her parents were out for a dinner party and her younger brother fast asleep, Michelle found herself unable to resist the allure of the forbidden. She descended the stairs cautiously, the old wooden steps protesting under her weight. The basement was colder than she expected, and the musty smell made her nose wrinkle in distaste. As she explored the dimly lit space, her eyes fell upon an old trunk tucked away in the corner. With trembling hands, she brushed off the layer of dust and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, she found a collection of faded photographs, each one more unsettling than the last. The photos depicted people she didn't recognize, frozen in moments of joy and sorrow. But it was the eyes that unsettled her the most. They seemed to follow her every move, their gazes filled with an unspoken plea. Trembling, Michelle slammed the lid shut and stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the eyes from the photographs had imprinted themselves onto her mind. Sleep eluded her, and she found herself counting down the minutes until the first light of dawn. But even as the sun rose, casting its warm glow over the world outside, Michelle couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of her stomach. The basement held secrets, she was sure of it, and she was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. In the days that followed, Michelle's obsession with the basement only grew stronger. She spent hours poring over the old photographs, trying to decipher the identities of the people captured within them. But the more she searched, the more questions arose, like a tangled web of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. One afternoon, while rummaging through her father's study for clues, Michelle stumbled upon an old journal tucked away in the back of a dusty bookshelf. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the ink had begun to fade. But as she flipped through them, she realized she had stumbled upon a treasure trove of secrets. The journal belonged to a previous owner of the house, a man named Edward Sinclair. His entries spoke of strange occurrences in the basement, of whispers in the darkness and shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. But what intrigued Michelle the most were the mentions of a hidden room, a place he referred to only as the sanctum. Driven by curiosity, Michelle returned to the basement, armed with a flashlight and a newfound sense of determination. She searched every nook and cranny until, at last, she found it. A small, concealed door hidden behind a pile of old crates. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness beyond. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sound of her own heartbeat echoed in her ears as she ventured further into the unknown. What she found within the hidden chamber sent shivers down her spine. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars containing strange, unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room stood a makeshift altar, adorned with symbols she couldn't begin to decipher. But it was the figure huddled in the corner that made her blood run cold. A man, or what was left of one. His skin stretched taut over bones that seemed almost skeletal. His eyes, sunken and hollow, locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely more than a rasp. "Please, you have to help me." Frozen in fear, Michelle stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. But as the man's desperate pleas filled the air, a newfound sense of resolve washed over her. She may not have known who he was or how he came to be trapped within the confines of the hidden chamber, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't leave him there to suffer alone. With trembling hands, Michelle approached the man, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The man's eyes flickered with a spark of recognition, as if her words had stirred something long buried within his fractured mind. "My name is Thomas," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I was a servant in this house, long ago." As Thomas recounted his tale, Michelle listened in horror. He spoke of dark rituals conducted in the dead of night, of sacrifices made in the name of power and greed. And at the heart of it all was Edward Sinclair, the man whose journal she had found, and the mastermind behind the unspeakable horrors that had plagued the house for generations. Determined to set things right, Michelle helped Thomas to his feet, and together they made their way out of the hidden chamber and into the light of day. But as they emerged from the depths of the basement, they were met with a sight that sent chills down their spines. Standing before them, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, was Edward Sinclair himself, his eyes filled with a malevolent gleam. "You shouldn't have come here, Michelle," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "Some secrets are best left buried." But Michelle refused to back down. With Thomas by her side, she confronted Sinclair head-on, determined to put an end to the darkness that had plagued her family for far too long. In the end, it was a battle of wills, a struggle between light and darkness, good and evil. And though the scars of that fateful encounter would linger for years to come, Michelle emerged victorious, her family free from the shadows that had threatened to consume them.